So I'm going to talk about something called emotional capacity, right? And this is a really cornerstone aspect of making relationships work, emotional capacity. Because ultimately, as men, we do not learn emotional capacity. We often learn physical capacity, right? You know, a lot of guys, you know, like me, I played sport. So I play sport and then I went to the gym. I could hold things. I could push my body in ways that was pretty incredible, right? I could run very fast over short distances, and then I learned to do long distances. But we don't learn emotional capacity, right? That's something we do not learn. And you could look at most women, you might argue that they don't learn physical capacity in the same way, because often they're not as interested in sports, traditionally, not always. You know, I look back at my PE class and half the girls would just have notes to say why they couldn't do it. Not to say that's like that anymore, but you guys get the drift. Whereas women, I haven't explained what emotional capacity is. Let me tell you. Emotional capacity is the ability to stay present, stay embodied, staying in the body, in the feelings, and responsive while experiencing emotional or relational intensity or difficulty, right? Or even a positivity. So you get what I mean, right? It's staying there in the moment when the difficulty, when the intensity, when the emotions start to arise, right? Instead of shutting down, withdrawing, going silent, dissociating, which is like just almost like leaving your body. You start thinking about being somewhere else, or even being distracted, that can show up as, right? Or getting angry, getting really reactive. That's often where we go, right? So think of capacity kind of like a cup, right? Imagine this is a tiny cup. Right? This is most men's emotional capacity, right? So you pour a little bit of water into the cup. I don't have a cup in front of me. I do, but it's like full of stuff. You start pouring it in, right? You pour stuff into the cup, and then slowly it gets up to here, and it's reached its capacity, right? So then anything else that goes in just leaks out, doesn't it? Just leaks out. You know that, right? You've been there, you've done that. It just leaks out. So all it takes is for work stress, you know, family stuff happening, not sleeping very well, slight frustration because you've injured your knee, and suddenly your emotional capacity, right? So when your partner's like, hey, I want to talk about a relationship, you're just like, you don't have anything to say, you're overwhelmed, you can't speak, you shut down, or you become reactive, you get angry, you take things personally. Your emotional capacity is low, right? Because you have a small cup. Now, let's think that you have a bucket. I'm holding an imaginary bucket here, which is like 10 times the size of my little cup, right? It takes a lot for this emotional capacity to get built because it's a big bucket, yeah? So that work stress, like kiddie stress, maybe you got kids, your mum's giving you some stuff, you got some intensity because you got like an exam coming up or a promotion or an appraisal coming up, but you still got a lot of space, right? So when your partner comes to you and she's like, hey, I want to talk about a relationship, you're like, okay, cool. I've got space. You feel like you have space in your mind. Your mind doesn't feel cluttered. It doesn't feel like you're just about to be like overwhelmed or you're already overwhelmed. You feel pretty spacious. You almost feel quite calm and relaxed. You're like, okay, cool. We can do this. Maybe there's a little bit of fear of like, oh, I don't know what she's going to say. Maybe she's going to want to break up with me. I don't know. And then she starts to talk and you're listening. And maybe even the stress level's right, but you still feel a spaciousness. You still feel an ability to be present, to feel yourself, whatever's happening, and be responsive to what she's saying, not the projection of what you're saying, what you think she's saying, right? And respond. See, I've explained it really well there, right? What it isn't, what emotional capacity isn't talking about your feelings endlessly, right? I think sometimes that's kind of like emotional availability or even kind of an emotional vomiting where we talk about our feelings endlessly, right? We don't do anything about them. Or we don't particularly feel them as emotions. We just talk about them intellectually. This emotional capacity is not being calm all the time, because often what we think is being calm all the time is actually emotionally shut down or emotionally disassociated, right? This is something that we can appear calm on the exterior, right? Because we're not reacting, but actually inside we are turmoil and we are full to the brim, right? You know that feeling where, you know, on the outside, you're just kind of sitting there like this and nodding. And someone's like, wow, this dude's so calm. I'm firing him. And this dude is just sitting here nodding away. Or your partner's telling you that she slept with your best friend and you're like, Okay, cool. Yeah, all right. That's not great. You're not reacting. It seems like you're calm. It might even seem like you don't care. But ultimately what's happening is internally, you're experiencing the chaos. You're experiencing the overwhelm, the emotion, the shutdown of not wanting to speak, of not being able to feel what's going on. You have reached your emotional capacity. So it's not about looking calm all the time. And then the last one I want to say, it's not about understanding all the terms and psychology. I think in this day and age where we can get access to information whenever we want, right? Because we've got the internet, and it's gone from the internet, we've got AI. So if you want to know about the science of your emotional capacity and why you shut down, you can learn all the terms. You can learn about probably some bits I'm going to tell you in a bit. You can learn about all of it, right? But this doesn't help you stop it from happening. It doesn't help you grow your capacity by knowing all the things. And I think we often mistake knowledge with skill level. It's a bit like reading every book you can find on football tactics and how to kick the ball well and how to do all sorts of crazy swerves and take free kicks, but you never actually get on the pitch and kick the ball. You know, I talk about football for my US people. I'm talking about soccer. You know, Messi didn't become one of the best players ever, right? Because he read all the books, or that he went on ChatGPT and learned about football. He was on the pitch from the age of like 4 or 5 years old. He was in the game. He was playing. He was practicing, making mistakes. And this is a really important part of emotional capacity. You've got to be willing to be in it to grow it and make it bigger. And your luck is in, right? Your emotional capacity isn't fixed. It isn't fixed. You don't grow up with a small capacity and then you're fucked, and then that's how it is forever. It isn't. Your emotional capacity grows over time. This is really important for you to know, right? Your emotional capacity grows over time. So, little stat here, right? Research from the Gottmans, who are a wonderful couple, and they've got an institute. They've done loads of amazing research around relationships. They're a lovely old couple. Shows that emotional flooding shuts down the cognitive processing, problem solving, and empathy in conflict, right? And emotional flooding occurs to men more, right? It occurs to men more, which is when like the emotions and feelings you experience, they basically cause your brain to start to shut down, or the prefrontal cortex, the thing we love to, mentally masturbate around, this kind of conscious mind, this part of the mind that's really around like problem solving, as I said, like the thinking part, the executive part of the brain. That's what the words I'm looking for. It starts to shut down, right? So ultimately what happens, and it's kind of, I've said this already, is when your body becomes overwhelmed, when you become overwhelmed emotionally, your brain goes offline. You stop thinking like a human being, like an adult, and you probably start thinking like a child, because we often, what I've seen in myself and clients, is we revert back to our childhood behavior, right? Which is sometimes it's, for you, might have been tantrums. So you start screaming and shouting. Right? You start reacting emotionally in that way, like outwardly reacting emotionally. Or maybe like myself, you start to shut down and stop speaking. You're just thinking about a way to get out. How can I say something to get out of this as fast as possible? You're trying to run away. That is something that I see time and time again. When we become overwhelmed, we go back to base programming, right? We become stressed and overwhelmed. So why do men specifically struggle when it comes to emotional capacity and relationships? Right. So I think the first part we have to start with is the point of one. We are undertrained. We are undertrained. I want to tell you about the study that before I get into this, right? And I see this. Studies on emotional socialization, right, show that boys receive significantly less emotional coaching language than girls in early childhood. This starts before the boy has left the womb. We start talking to boys and girls differently before they leave the womb. Everyone's going to go, no, I don't do that. I'm going to talk to my children the same. You don't. Because unconsciously, we have a template of how a boy should be and a girl to be. We can do our best to kind of rage against that. But ultimately, it's there, right? And boys through their lives are discouraged from expressing emotions like fear, sadness, struggles, and so forth. It just happens slowly, right? And the society is changing. It is changing. But, I'm 40 years old, so this happened to me in the 80s and 90s, right? And I definitely remember people telling me not to cry, like, you'll be fine. I find myself having to notice that one of my own child with Bjorn, like, oh, you're okay. Oh, it's going to be okay. Actually, when he especially becomes verbal, he's like going, how do you feel? instead of it's going to be okay, because by saying it's going to be okay, you're actually just trying to shut down his feeling and emotion. You're telling him, I don't want your feelings and emotions here, right? I know we mean well. We do it with kids. We do it for adults as well. But we are emotionally undertrained as men. Again, this isn't your fault, but it becomes your responsibility if you want to have happy, healthy relationships, right? So what this teaches us as boys is we suppress our emotions. We have to kind of self-regulate our own, meaning we have to come back into, we have to be on our own to understand our emotions, right? Or just to feel into an okay state. We should avoid emotional expression. We should avoid any vulnerability as well. And then we don't learn the skills of communicating how we feel, communicating our feelings and feeling safe to communicate, right? So this is something I see with men a lot. They don't feel safe to communicate their feelings and emotions. As soon as I have to do that, even with me, when I'm trained to listen to them and they know it's safe because they've listened to the podcast like you guys, they've come to my workshops. They are like, okay, you know, I'm feeling like this. And when I ask them questions and, you know, in that time, I'm sitting there and I'm just listening. I got no judgment about men's feelings. You know, I've heard all sorts in my time. So they see it on my face, they feel it in my presence, and then they start to relax and they start to open up more because I'm asking questions because I'm curious, right? But most men have never had that experience, especially of other guys, right? Sometimes we get it with the women in our lives and we become more relaxed in doing so, and that's really good for us, but it can mean that we end up using the women in our lives as emotional processors or putting all our emotions on them to be with us with, and that becomes a burden as well. It should be a burden we share across the people in our lives, the important people in our lives. So it means that we don't learn the practice of emotions. And I'll talk about myself here. When I was like, again, in my 20s, I would have said at the time that I'm a pretty, you know, emotionally intelligent person. I have conversations with my friends about sadness and anger and frustration. But like when I was in relationship, like just any conflict would just be like, I would just shut down. I couldn't be in the conversation. I thought I could be, but I was just projecting what I thought was happening. I became almost instantly overwhelmed. Partners like, I'm not happy about this in a relationship. I became defensive. Yeah, that's another sign of kind of emotional overwhelm often. I become defensive. I became counterattacking where I'd be like, no, this is your fault because you do this, this, and this. I was undertrained in being in those sorts of conversations. I was undertrained in feeling my emotions and being open and discussing them and not taking their emotions personally, something I did a lot with women.